Hello and welcome. Thank you for taking the time today to attend. My name is Jennifer Klaverkamp. I am a principal at Professional Office Environments and will be your moderator for the next hour. POE is thrilled to be hosting this event today. Over 8 months ago, our lives changed dramatically, both at work and at home. And I am one that didn't think this change would last past the summer. But here we are, just 2 short months left in the year, and this change isn't going away. So many of us have completely shifted how we work. I never thought I'd be hosting a presentation for a large group of people from my house. For me, work was at work, and for the most part, home was for me and my family. So here we are looking towards 2021. We see many companies continue to question next steps. Is work from home here to stay? Is a hybrid model better for our organization? Can we have a thriving company if we don't have a place to gather? How is this time influencing our productivity, our innovation, our culture? How do we get our people excited about returning to the office? What do we need to do to continue to ensure that we will have a company for people to return to after the fear is reduced? And many, many more. Well, we have pulled together 3 experts that can cover many of the aspects of this conversation, not only talking about St. Louis, but each of our panelists has worked with small creative firms, school, healthcare facilities, through to large global Fortune 500 companies. I look forward to sharing the conversations about their own organizations, which are all global organizations, in addition to the research and conversations that they're having with their clients. So our goal, our ultimate goal for today, is that the information that you take away from these conversations will help you decide what your next steps should be, maybe even reinforce some of the decisions that you're actively making are the right ones for your organization. So with that, let's take a look at the agenda before I introduce our panelists. With that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So we're kicking off today with Michelle Rotherham. So she is the Associate Vice President of Corporate and Commercial Market at Canon Design. Michelle leads the interior design practice in the St. Louis office and is WELL AP, LEED AP, NCIDQ certified interior designer with experience across commercial, health, and education markets. With more than 13 years experience designing commercial environments of all scales for multiple markets, Michelle holds deep knowledge of the entire design process. She leads clients through strategy development, project management, design, and ultimately successful project completion. She distinguishes herself with strong passion for design excellence, user experience, and technology that spans markets and deepens her ability to drive value for her clients. Michelle is also a co-founder of a local nonprofit, Home First, STL, which provides hope, housing, and advocacy to people experiencing homelessness. She is a proud resident of the city of St. Louis with her husband and 2-year-old daughter. So we're excited to hear from Michelle. Next up will be Blaise Tomazic. He is the Vice President of Office Brokerage at JLL. Blaise knows his market. He's got over 12 years of experience in the commercial real estate, with 10 of those being in the research department. His primary focus is helping tenants and building owners with their commercial real estate needs. So I'm thrilled to hear some of the statistics he's pulled together today for us. And then finally, we have Rob Hendrickson, and he is in charge of business development at Hayworth. Rob is a workplace advisor, helping companies develop and execute plans for their current and future workspaces. He has worked with organizations small and large in North America and around the world, helping them transform their global real estate brands and workspaces to maximize the investment in both people and space. So with that, again, I want to thank everyone for attending today and remind you again about the question and answer section of our the chat. And I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to kick us off.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
And thanks to POE for having me today. I really enjoy these conversations this year, especially as we hopefully get closer to a post-COVID reality. I especially like the thought of that. So I'm going to share a little bit about Canon Design and how we've kind of fared through this, as well as myself personally. So you can flip, Jen. So just a few takeaways from this year. We learned how to work with everyone at home, and everyone is really the key word in there, because I personally am no stranger to kind of the work anywhere idea. I have historically kind of been all over the place. I'm meeting with clients, I work wherever my laptop is. However, you're used to having that home base. So that really was a shift to kind of going from everybody is, for the most part, at the office to no one being at the office. So that certainly was a shift. Of course, Canon has 20 offices, so we're used to virtually we work national clients. So from a technology standpoint and a meeting standpoint, that really wasn't all that different for us. So luckily, we had that mastered beforehand. But I think the big difference is we're not used to only seeing our coworkers on video. So one-on-ones with any of our coworkers were on a screen. So that certainly was different, and it had to be much more deliberate than it did before. A lot more impromptu conversations were happening, and that really wasn't the case anymore. So that's really made us think about, even when we get back totally into the office, how we really need to make time for those connections with people. We did open our offices for the most part. Our St. Louis office opened in June. We were the first out of everyone. We own our building. It was a bit easier than our friends in New York or Chicago to open, who are both in office towers. But that really was a shift as well. It's not mandatory for people to be in. So really, we were learning now how to work with most people still at home. I am in most days. I love working at our office. I love being close to a few of my younger coworkers who need to be close to other people while they grow and learn, quite frankly. So I'm keeping that in mind. These in-person meetings are gold. The in-person meetings that I've had over the past couple of months, some people, that's the only reason they come in, is if they're going to have a meeting with someone. And I think that that's really one of those trends we're going to see. If you can flip to the next one, Jen. We've learned how to over-communicate. So when we all went home in March, day one was the email that we got from our CEO. And every day after that, we got a new email from him that included things from his heart. They were very transparent with what was going on, down to like brass tacks. What do we need to know in terms of how we're doing our business, what's happening, and those modes of communication were sort of across many different platforms. So I'm really proud of the company and how they handled communication in general. Wellness resources were also amplified. So, we had a pretty good program to begin with, but, really making sure that everyone was super aware of what we had access to. And then also just kind of those ancillary things like, webinars, personal webinars on sustainable living or, communication in general. So that was really great to see. And then really just, showing empathy to everyone that we were working with was one of the key pieces of that communication category. Everyone was in such a different boat, and frankly, a lot of people still are. I luckily have daycare back for my 2.5-year-old, but I'm afraid I have some like residual PTSD from that 2.5 months that I didn't have that. But a lot of people are still in that same boat, doing virtual learning. And so just really showing empathy to our coworkers and making sure that they know that we understand and that we're all being flexible. So you can go to the next one, Jen. And then lastly, just we learned how to persevere in general. Our St. Louis office was really lucky in that our work didn't really slow down all that much. We have a really diverse market set across the company in general, but certain cities were impacted a bit more than we were. So being at a 20-person office, you're able to, or 20 office firm, you're able to kind of distribute and share the love as you need. So that's been a godsend, I think. We have learned how to win work virtually, which is not the same as securing projects in person. So we did training, we practiced, then we practiced again and again and again, and we were successful. A lot of the strategies that we use to work with our clients, we were able to use those same types of tools to really get them comfortable with working with us. And so that's been really cool to watch. That's an innovation for sure internally. And then, like I said, we did open our offices again for those who wanted to be back. We thought that it was really important to offer space to people who needed it. Again, not everybody's working situation from home is the same. So just from an equity standpoint, we thought it was really important. It was a lot of work, a lot of communication to do that, but we thought it was really important. So then from an industry standpoint, that was, I really prefer to talk about these. You can go to the next one, Jen. I really prefer to think about this as more of like the post-COVID versus like how do we safely go back during the pandemic. I feel like a lot of our clients have either gone back and figured out how they can do that, at least in the short term, or they've decided we aren't going back for a while. So they've kind of set that long-term plan in place. And so really what companies are thinking more about is what do we do next? Once everybody feels safe to come back, how do we continue to design our office environments based on how everything has sort of changed this year? So this is a little early happy Halloween to everybody, but also benchmarks are dead. It's been really great to be able to kind of compare companies and figure out, okay, where do we stand? It feels like we're at the beginning now of a new set of benchmarks. And so I think that everyone, be patient because these are not one size fits all kind of solutions that are to come. But I'll give you a little bit of insight into maybe what some of the overarching options could look like. We are truly a changed society after this year, so we need to respond to it. So workplaces are going to move from spaces that help you accomplish tasks to a place where you connect with your coworkers for a variety of different things. That really was the trajectory before the pandemic. So it's not a new thing. It's just the pandemic has sort of like rapid fired the world into that trend. So, we can't unlearn what we have learned this year. We know that it can work to work virtually, but we also know what we're missing. So you can go to the next one, Jen. Even in the most conservative organizations, we've proven that work can still get done when we're not kind of in that seat at the office. I think these are somewhat interesting stats. So 42% of respondents, and this was a recent survey, September 16th of this year, 42% had a positive view of working remotely versus only 14% having viewed it negatively. So that at least tells us, that people are interested in this staying around at least to some degree. You can go to the next one. And then 72% say they would like to work away from the office at least 2 days a week. I wouldn't say that's all that different from what I was seeing before the pandemic. I mean, we were we were seeing similar stats in that people were interested in flexibility before. I think that the difference now is that it's proven to be able to work. So these stats are going to be a bit harder to ignore for organizations. So Jen, you can go to the next one. So if task-based work can happen anywhere, how do we design our offices in the future? So the real estate requirements may shift. Well, like I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all for all organizations. So I just want to show a few kind of options, I think, as like overarching strategies. And you can go to the next one, Jen. So there's sort of 4 categories that I'll chat with you about. So the brick and mortar is sort of the most traditional that we're all used to. That's like having the headquarters. It's self-contained. It provides employees with pretty much everything under the sun that they need, including including lots of amenities that they might not have to leave the building to do anything. So that's one way. And then the hub and spoke below that, that's really looking at like decentralized outposts. So you maybe have a city center for a headquarters, but you're thinking about, do we have separate spaces that are maybe closer to where people live? This is especially prevalent in the larger cities within the country, where people are dealing with really long commutes and frankly now maybe don't necessarily want to get on public transportation every day, might not feel safe to do that. So that hub and spoke is really, it's still a company space, so they're leasing that space, but then they basically just have satellites. The remote first is really, the majority of people are doing their tasks away from an office, at home or wherever they choose to do it. But then those headquarters spaces are really like a cultural center. So it's where people are getting together to collaborate or do things that they might not be able to do from their homes. And for some organizations, there are not a lot of tasks that do require that. But I think that what we've seen is that people are just so missing that socialization and that team connection that, regardless of whether, yeah, we could do this on a virtual meeting, but God, it would be so much richer if we could do it in person. And that's why I said earlier, those in-person meetings are just seriously gold. And I look forward to them so much because it's not all about productivity and getting things done. It's about, like developing trust with the people you work with. It's about developing relationships. And you also get the work done at the same time. So you're not trading one for the other. You're doing both. And that's a wonderful thing. Co-working, everyone's pretty familiar with. That's really, you're using hoteling stations. It's similar to hub and spoke, except for that company is not owning that real estate necessarily. It's part of a bigger network. It's much more, it's kind of everything's taken care of. You may have an office within a co-working space, but for the most part, those spaces are not kind of branded to your company experience. So you can go to the next one. Almost finished. So from an outlook on 2021 standpoint, fingers crossed, it's going to be better than this year. Me personally, I really want to focus on mastering virtual culture, regardless of whether we're in person or I really see that like hybrid workforce to some degree staying. And so I really want to figure out how can we make that a good experience, regardless of where you are. I'm going to hire on my team before we're out of this. So, I really want to make sure that when somebody new comes on, that it isn't, kind of a second tier experience for them, that it's just as good as if everybody was in the office. So that's a tall order. I don't know if I'll succeed fully in that, but I'm certainly going to try. So I'm gonna hand it over to Blaze now for his outlook.
Thanks, Michelle, and I think we probably echo a lot of the same thoughts here. But So for me personally, our office shut down in mid-March, the week after, I like to say the week sports got canceled. As everything just kind of all of a sudden stopped, and we closed for about 3 months and reopened in mid-June. I was a part of phase one, which is 25% occupancy for our office. And we've, as of last week, JLL, while we have offices all over the world, focusing on the US for a minute, we've successfully opened 100 offices now through mid-October, all to varying degrees. I think it's all based a lot on local guidelines and obviously comfort level of employees, but that's kind of where we're at. So we had about a 3-month pause where things slowed down pretty significantly. Lucky for us, we've invested a lot in technology over the last couple of years, so we were able to still service our clients on a virtual level. I did several virtual tours of the market using some mapping software we've created, so it allowed us to stay in touch with people. And frankly, it saves some time. A building tour for us, if we go and look at 4 to 5 options for someone, that might take an entire morning or an afternoon, but we can wrap that up into an hour. So it actually created some efficiency for us on that end, which is good. And I think it forced a lot of people to embrace our technology that they may not have initially. So it kind of pushed everyone towards that a little bit, which I think is really benefits us all in the long run. Me personally, I have 2 kids at home, so it created a pretty crazy environment. They're 7 and 5, so my wife and I became teachers, which we realized we're not so great at. But it was that 3-month period is pretty tough, just because of everything that was going on, and it seems like it's continuing on right now, unfortunately, here for the near future. But we're still not allowing visitors to our office, which is a mandate nationally for us right now at JLL. So this is kind of where things are. So we do a lot of stuff virtually. I've had a lot of coffee at Caldi's in Kirkwood over the last couple months. That's probably stopping now because of weather, but I've been there more times than I can count, just because it's a good outdoor place to hang out and meet people. So that's really been my personal story. And like I said, we've opened up successfully, and I think it's gone well so far. And I'd say on most days, on average, we're at about 25% capacity. We're a 25 to 30 person office, and any given day there's probably 6 to 10 people here. But we're all, we haven't made any structural changes to our office, but we're spread out, and we have masks if we get up and move around, and there's just kind of a little bit more cautiousness and individual paths. So. You can go on to the next slide right now, and I can get started here. So kind of taking a look at what's happened here in the office market, and it's a small window of time to look at in the office market, because things change a little bit slower just because of the way the industry works with tenants that have leases rolling and expirations coming up. So there's been a huge push to densify the office over the last 30 years, really 40 years at this point. And you can see some data on the right there that since 2009, we've increased our density by about 13%, which is more than Europe and Asia Pacific. So the U.S. has been on that trend a little bit. I think we're a little bit behind those regions a little bit more. So we've kind of been catching up. But as you can see, I wasn't around in the 80s when those computers were there, but the office has changed a little bit since then. And I'll show you, going on to the next slide here, what happened in March and how drastic it was. So in February, based on our data and information, 92% of people were working in the office, 8% remotely. In March, that took a huge hit, and there's obvious reasons for that, and it continued through the summer as tenants continued to stay at home and work from home. We slowly started to see an uptick. I'd say our tour activity, where people are getting out and looking at space, has gone up in the last 60 days. Which is a good sign. But unless you have a lease expiration coming up, you're kind of taking a wait and see approach at this point, because no one really knows what the future is going to hold. And we're in October right now. We're projecting it's about 15% in office versus 85% remote. I think that's a little bit higher right now. I was looking at some information from a company that does badge swiping data and they focus on the 10 largest major metro markets across the country. Major markets in Texas, Los Angeles are over 30% back in the office right now, just based on their information. But then you've got areas like San Francisco and New York where we're talking sub 20%. So as you can probably know, a lot of technology companies have been at the forefront of this, saying work from home is indefinite right now. I don't know if that trend is going to continue, but that is the current policy here. So as you can see, going through the end of next year, these are obviously projections, and I think a lot of things could change here, but we're seeing probably an 80-20 split when things go back to normalizing a little bit. And it could vary, but again, it's kind of hard to say without knowing what happens on the pandemic side of things in the near future. You can move on to the next slide. So what has this meant for the office market? So nationally, right now, leasing activity is down about 60% from pre-COVID levels. In St. Louis, it's down about 70%. And that's just the way the market is right now. It's kind of the way it is. If you don't have to do something, there's really not a huge reason to make a huge move right now. And I'll kind of show you some other information on that. We've seen a big uptick in sublease space across the country. We're at 124 million square feet. We've already surpassed .com and financial crisis levels. Locally here in St. Louis, we're at about just under 1 million at 900,000 square feet. About a third of that space has come on during COVID. Not all of that is COVID related, but a big chunk of that has been, there's companies that may have had excess space, shadow space, where they just decided this is kind of the kick they needed to see if they could get some relief from their space and maybe find a third-party tenant to backfill some of the excess space they've had. Construction across the U.S. is it's doing well, and we were coming off a pretty high time in the office market. So we're at about 134 million square feet of construction right now, or space that's under construction. About half of that's pre-leased. St. Louis is a little more conservative. We always have been on construction. We're at about 1.1 million, but about 80% of that is speculative. So I don't think we're going to see as big of a hit if there is a continued slowdown in the office market, just because we have not had the excess space that's been delivered. You can go to the next slide here, and we'll show you what we're looking at. So St. Louis, from an office perspective, has been outperforming the U.S. from a vacancy level, but obviously, not surprisingly, we've seen an uptick here from what we saw at the beginning of the year. It's just the way things have gone. There's been companies that have given back space or reduced footprint or just put up space for sublease. So we've seen a drastic increase in vacancy across the country. A big chunk of that is coming from the coastal markets, New York and San Francisco in particular. They've accounted for a huge chunk of sublease space, and that's been a big driver for vacancy. Next slide. And we've also seen a huge shift in what tenants are doing with their leases right now. So pre-COVID, about a third of tenants were renewing, staying in place. Maybe they were in 8,000 square feet, they were retaining 8,000 square feet. That's what they were doing. Majority of those were either expanding or relocating, and that has been completely flipped on its head during COVID. There's a lot of reasons for that, obviously. We don't know what the future is. We've seen tenants, especially larger corporations, look for shorter term because they just want to the best way to go about this is maybe kick the can for 12, 24, 36 months and see how the world is in a couple of years and see what we can do. So there's been a huge increase in just requests for renewals from tenants. So it's really I think a lot of companies have taken a wait and see approach, because there's a lot of fine details to this, but if your lease is up in 12 months and you don't know what the world's going to look like in 24 months, now might not be the best time to invest a bunch of money in redoing your office when things could be completely different in a short term, or in the longer term. So there's a lot of things to consider, and I think many have kind of taken a cautious wait and see approach right now. That could change in 6 months if we get on the other side of this pandemic, but at this point in time, that's just what's happening, on the ground right now. Next slide. So looking ahead, you can go to the next one here. This is one of my favorite slides. It's this very simplistic way of looking at things on the left, right? Everyone's working from home all of a sudden, so there's going to be less demand for office space. There's way more to that. I think there are so many different companies. Every situation is unique right now. If you're a law firm that everyone has private offices and you can easily distance people, there's probably not a hard time getting everyone back in the office and making things work from that end because you can have your own personal workspace. If you're an open office environment where everyone's really dense, it's going to be a little bit harder to do that. So there's so many caveats to that. There are things, and we talked about this earlier, there's things, building culture. Everything shut down in March. We all knew each other in the office. We had relationships with most people, so we knew what they did on the weekends. We knew, what maybe their interests were. So it wasn't too hard to keep that work environment going, and in the short term, because we had those relationships. I think as this extends on, it's going to be really hard to keep a innovative workforce that's, collaborates well. Productivity is going to be really hard. I think it's hard to keep people in front of a screen for 8 hours a day working remotely, without some human interaction. And I'll get into that in a second here, but there's so many little things to this that I think it's really going to determine the future going forward, that it's really hard to say what's going to happen. But again, it's not as simple as what's on the left there, is that it's just going to decrease office space. There's way more to it. And I think every individual location, even within a company, is very unique. So it just is all dependent. I know our offices down in Texas are way more occupied than our offices on the coast right now, just the way it goes. So I think within a company, there's unique situations there. Move on to the next slide. So a big thing of this is looking at your employees and what they want. I think it's hard to take a top-down approach to say, we're all going to be back in the office 5 days a week. I think you really have to figure out what people want. And right now, based on some survey information we've done, if you focus on the red bars there, we're talking about 78% of people expect to or want to be back in the office at least a couple days a week, which is why, Michelle mentioned a hybrid model. I think that's probably going to be the way to go. It's going to be the future, I think, at least in the next 24 months, just because people are going to want to come in and have some interaction, but maybe there's time a couple days a week where they want to work from home and get their busy work done on a Monday and a Tuesday, and they come in and meet with their teams on a Wednesday and a Thursday, and then everyone kind of goes from there. So you might see a trend where no one has a set office location anymore or a set workstation. It's just open, and that group comes in, a couple days a week, and then the other group comes in. So it ties into what people miss. And I kind of touched on this earlier, but if you look at what the top of the chart is there, collaborating, socialization, supporting others, I think we're social creatures by nature. So that's what's really being missed right now. And I don't know if people are getting Zoom fatigue or what. It might be some of it, but ironically enough, I just saw that Zoom surpassed ExxonMobil in market cap today. So maybe I'm wrong. Though ExxonMobil, I think, has 160 times greater revenues than Zoom does. But that's the way of the world right now. Everyone thinks we're just going to be talking interactively going forward, and that might be the case, but certainly is a little bit a little bit shocking to see that news. And next slide, please. So again, I know a lot of companies, in particular tech, have said it's indefinite work from home. You can do whatever you want. If you look at the quotes from some of these people, they're from some of the largest corporations in the country and even globally: Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Netflix, Facebook, Google. They all see the need, at least according to their CEOs and COOs, that there's going to be a push to get people back in the office again at some point, and they feel like that's how they're going to succeed. So again, we're in a really weird time where it's just due to health reasons we've got to be very, very careful. But I think when we get on the other side of this, we'll probably have a short memory when it comes to it, and people will start getting back to a normal at some point. And that's all I've got. So I will turn it over to Rob here.
Thank you for the transition. And at the risk of repeating everything that Michelle and Blaise have said, I think things are pretty common. And actually, Michelle said it at the beginning of her presentation. This work from anywhere is really what we're looking at. People are finding that they can work from anywhere, but there are some issues that might affect that. So when we look at that, why the office? And I think, even some of these leaders of industry that were on Blaise's last page really talk a little bit about it. It's really that place that people choose to go when they leave home to do work, right? It's a place where they can collaborate, they can create, they can innovate, they can connect socially. We find people, and a lot of our customers say, hey, you know what? We're really good at doing focused work at home, but it takes a lot longer to get things done, right? Because you're missing being in front of those people. So people really miss that human interaction, and I'm one of those people. I've traveled for most of my career. I've been with Haverhill for 20 years. I've worked with people on a local, in Kansas City, then St. Louis, and then I was at Hayworth Corporate and worked nationally and internationally for 16 years. And things have changed significantly. So when you look a little bit about the experience that we've had too with Hayworth from an individual basis, I'm here in Kansas City, moved back in December. Lockdown happened in, March, and it was really slow. Michigan was one of those states that, you may have all heard, the governor there was very tight on restrictions. And the top three, furniture manufacturers in North America reside right there. And we're still very restrictive. And we can have a maximum of about 20 people that can come in, and you have to fill a very, very complicated form out to be able to get your employees to work from home. And so, from Hayworth, our perspective, we've got probably 12 showrooms in North America, and most of those are open, but we don't have a huge amount of traffic. When you look at our international basis, over 50% of our revenues come from outside of the United States, because we have a lifestyle designs group that's based out of Italy, and we do a lot of production and distribution in Asia Pacific. And China, the workforce is back in the office, but if you look at India, not so much. In Europe, people were starting to come back to the office, but now in Germany and France, things are shutting down again. And so from a perspective of how is Hayworth working, it's really been different. I am here in Kansas City. I work with two of our distributors, POE in St. Louis and another one here in Kansas City. I come into their office quite frequently because this is how I can get things done with my team. You can go to the next slide, Jennifer. So when you look at kind of the current state and future state, you've already heard this, some of our statistics, 85% of global employees are working from home. Blaze had a really great example to talk about how they see that happening over time. And, I think it's really important when you look at that current state and future state, and Blaze touched on it a little bit in his piece, is look at North America. When you look at North America, there are about 6 million small businesses, okay? And they employ about 60 million people, right? And our population is, 330 million. So that's a lot of the population that those small businesses employ. And if you look at businesses between 20 and 99 employees, that represents 526,000 small businesses. And it represents about 32 million people. Why I think that's important is because oftentimes, as Blaze talked about, when you look at the coast, things are different, right? They're higher density. Even as we looked at the compression of the floor plate in North America versus Europe and Asia, they do have higher compression. They have higher density cities. In the Midwest, we don't see that so much. So there's a little bit more flexibility. And I think as we've seen in our local markets and maybe even regionally, is there's more people that are back to work in the central part of the United States and in some of those small businesses. I mean, look at Michelle, your location with Canon there in St. Louis, you got 20 locations, but many of your people are back, and it brings up that whole notion of how do we connect with people. So you can go to the next slide, Jennifer. So we look at kind of 3 areas of focus that are really critical in that. Number one, and I worked with the University of Michigan for almost 10 years in our cultural research and how it applies to workspace and also innovation. We're all very concerned about the well-being of our employees. Employees first. We call our employees at Hayworth members. And as far as member well-being, I thought it was really interesting how Michelle said, their CEO was touching base with everybody, every day at the beginning. Hayworth, we used to have a management briefing that happened once a month. We totally disrupted that model and said this needs to be member direct to all employees all around the world once a month to make sure we're talking to those people. And then flexibility and adaptability. As we said, Blaze mentioned it, he's got, small children at home. Mine are out and in college. And when we relocated here, we moved to a smaller house and they moved in with us for a while, which we were like, okay, as soon as you move on, that's great. But I'm not teaching my kids at home. And that is something that we have to think about from the employee basis. So really look at the culture, look at the employee well-being, and thinks about how we can be flexible and adaptable. We can go to the next one, Jennifer. So when you look at that, 71% of people, we had similar statistics, I think 71, 72, 78, people, are comfortable working at home. People said they want to work from home once a week or, more than once a week would be ideal. We can go to the next one for those statistics. I think it's very consistent. But really also, I think what drives that in the office is what kind of culture exists in your organization overall as a company, what kind of organization exists in your department, and then also in your team. And then there's also the individual side of that. And the organizational culture piece that we work on, a competing values framework designed by the University of Michigan, is really a positivist model saying that there are different culture types that exist in your organization, in your departments, in your teams, in your leaders, and they will tell you, how do we feel about working from home? We've got an engineering firm here in Kansas City that on one floor where the executive staff sits, they're about, I'd say, 50 to 60% back in the office. On their second floor, where one of their largest departments is, they're only at about 5 to 10% occupancy. But the leader of that group on the second floor, that group is a remote leader. So they're not really demonstrating that people need to be back in the office. The executive leadership would like to have people back, but it's not permeating to that level because culture mitigates that. So there's kind of 4 culture types. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but there's the create culture, those who want to innovate. We heard Blaze talk about that. How are you going to innovate your business? If you've got a group that's particularly focused on that, they need to externalize their ideas. There's the compete group, right? Sometimes people that think of that as the finance or the sales people that are fast driving, they're looking at the numbers, they can work independently, they can work from anywhere. There's the collaborate group, right? Those are the social long-term connectors that are in your organization. And as Michelle said, when I've got younger people that are new to my organization, you need to nurture them a little bit. They need that more than anybody else. Then there's the control group that says, hey, you know what? Here's the rules. Here's how we interact. Here's how many times a week we do it. Make sure you have an agenda, stick to the agenda, right? So those different cultures will impact it. As you move to the next slide, Jennifer, our research shows that really that can really be connected to how people work in the office, how they work at home, and how they may work in that third place, which my third place is the coffee shop. That's where I'm out networking like Blaze. You've got to find those spaces that you can do it. And I've spent a lot more time in my home than my wife would like to hear. But, we have to do those things. And if you move to the next slide, we try to connect that back to that framework and say, okay, if you're a create culture, these people really like to be in the office because they need to externalize their ideas. Think of these people as a super particle collider for ideas, right? They're constantly picking up ideas from other people. They need to externalize that and they need to move it. But if you look at the compete people who are really fast, very task focused, they may say, hey, I can be in the third place or I can be in home. Office occasionally, doesn't really matter to me. The collaborate piece, those people really like to socialize in the office, right? They're okay working a couple days at home and also connecting in the third places for their network. And then you look at the control pieces. These people may be very regimented with their schedules, okay? They really like to know the predictability of being in the office and knowing I can get a hold of somebody at a certain time. So we can go on to the next one, Jennifer. So what we try to say is, hey, let's understand what's going on from the organizational level. Let's try to understand the culture of those independent groups and departments, and then think about in the future, how might we, as Michelle was saying, transform some of that floor plate? Why do people need to come together? I was talking to a president of a local university here in Kansas City, and he said, we were 20% online before COVID. We're now 80% online, but there's still times where students need to be here to collaborate with each other, and you can't do that as well remotely. It's the same way in your business. There might be people that need to do that, and you may have to adjust the floor plates a little bit. I think it's very true that as we look and change, these different colors that you're seeing here, these may talk a little bit about the private office areas. They may talk a little bit about the work group areas and the conference and collaboration spaces. And some of the spaces we have, with the lack of fresh air flow, right, may not be conducive to it. But we can still find ways to get people back. And I really like that graphic that Blaze talked about on the occupancy level. I do think it's going to change over time. Based on some of our research too, and we find that a lot of, even talking to local companies, some in St. Louis and Kansas City, is people who were naysayers about working remotely that said, you have to be here, I want to see my employees. They were kind of proved wrong. People can work remotely. So that's my summary, Jennifer, and I guess we can open it up for some questions here.
That was awesome. Thanks to each of you for what you shared. I did get a couple of questions. So where does, and I'm not sure, Blaze, if you felt specifically on St. Louis, but where does St. Louis fall on the return to work spectrum as compared to other regions? So do we have more or less people kind of getting back into the office at this point, or where does St. Louis fall?
I think we're somewhere in the middle. If I had to guess, I think we're probably at about 25%. It's hard to know specifically every single office. We surveyed a bunch of companies back in mid-May, just about, when are you planning to go back to the office? And a majority of them that didn't have a date thought, end of the summer we'll be back. Well, I've talked to some of those people. We haven't done a resurvey or anything like that, and asked, and it seems like most of them keep pushing back. I have friends at some pretty decent sized corporations right now that they thought they were going back in January. Now it's April. So there's this wait and see approach that I think on the larger side, on the larger companies they're more hesitant to get back. Smaller businesses, I think, are way more back in the office right now than larger companies. That's just, I don't have a data point right now to back that up, but that's just a hunch I have, just based on people I talk to and kind of the feel I get.
I agree, Blair. I think that's what we find too.
So on kind of that same topic, does size play a role in the companies getting back to the office? Blaze, you kind of made reference to, larger companies not going back yet, but is there a trend with the smaller ones being more aggressive in getting back to the office versus larger?
I think so. And that, again, this is just a personal opinion based on who I've talked to. I think if you're a small, 12-person law firm, for example, you don't have a ton of space, but you've also got private offices, maybe financial services. It all is so unique to your individual layout. But if you're a 40-person marketing firm that everyone sits in open workstations and it's bench seating, and you can't really properly distance individuals, it's a lot harder to do. At the same time, if you're a huge corporation that occupies 100,000+ square feet, there's a lot of stuff you have to do to make your space open right now. It's just how it is. Like, there's just a lot of things to consider, whether it's directional walking, where do you seat people? How do you move people? And it's just, so I think for that reason, you've seen a lot of companies just simply say, especially if they're office companies and they have a lot of people working on laptops and they can be remote, stay at home right now if you want, or our office is open. If you want to come in, feel free to do so. You just have to take precautions X, Y, and Z to make that happen.
I think it also matters, what type of building people are working in. So regardless of their size, I agree there is definitely, the larger the company, the longer out I'm seeing for a return. But, like for our office, we're the only ones coming to work here. We're not going into a large lobby where we're crossing paths with lots of people we don't know. So I think that plays a big factor too.
Yeah.
I agree. We see a lot too with that kind of multi-tenant notion, right? If you've got a multi-story building, you can't control what other people are doing, right?
Right. No, that's a good point. So Michelle, question for you. Do you see the role of the office space changing? I know Blaze made reference to unassigned seating potentially becoming more popular. Are you having those conversations with your clients, or?
Yes. I think in a lot of cases, the role of the office will change. That does not mean that it's going away or that it's going to get smaller. I think it more so just means that the reasons people come there will be different. So some of our larger clients, one of our largest tech clients is, they had multiple projects in the design phase in March, and instead of just kind of continuing as they were, they basically they didn't put everything on hold necessarily. They more so just shifted focus to reimagining what the post-pandemic office might look like. So it was, what is that draw going to be? And that really, interestingly, was even before we really knew as much as we know now, from what we've all been going through. But I thought that was really amazing that they were so forward thinking and not necessarily putting the brakes on everything. They took it as an opportunity to, think about, well, God, how can we do this better? And then, one of our other larger tech clients, there was news in the media about, remote forever. And I think that people really misconstrued that to think that was just a reaction to what we've been going through this year, when really it's just a formalization of something that's already been happening. So they're giving people choice to where and how and when they work, but they are building awesome offices for people to come when they want to, and they will continue to do that. So again, I saw in Blaze's slide, a lot of leaders are still understanding that there's value in designing great space. It's just what people do there might be a little bit different going forward.
What about technology in general? How does technology play a role in the change of the workspace?
I really love thinking about, not necessarily in a year, but maybe in 5 years, how much it can improve, especially when it comes to people working in one location, so let's say we have 4 of us in a physical location in a room, and then we have 4 people or however many working elsewhere. That technology is just not good enough right now. It's just not good enough. And I'm excited to see how that will change, because there is a good solution out there, and one that people can afford, and that makes it so that people that aren't in the room feel just as included as people that are. So I'm excited at thinking about that, but I'm also leery right now that we're just not quite there with where it needs to be, but it's going to play a huge role.
Rob, do you see any changes in space with technology, or is Hayward looking, forward?
Yeah, I definitely think, and I think that, one of my favorite things to think about is, after the 1918 pandemic, right, was the Roaring 20s. I keep, hanging my hat on that. And the 20s was an incredible time for innovation, right? And I think that this, to Michelle's point, we're not there yet, but there's no better time to bet it all than when the chips are down. And if you look at the way that companies have been forced to assimilate, and employees have been, forced to use, Microsoft's Teams, right? Here we are using it right now. Before, when I was in Holland, Michigan, I was like, oh my God, it's just one more distraction that pops up on my desktop every day. What do I need that for? And, we actually have a technology company that we have now integrated into, Microsoft Teams. And I think that the workplace is going to have to change. People are going to come together because they need to collaborate, and some of it's physical, but a lot of it can be digital. People are far more nimble with it now. Heck, I've been on calls with you, Jennifer, where my laptop, runs out of battery, and I just hop on my phone and join my Teams meeting there. So, it just goes to show these things are changing, and it's going to change the physical place. But I think I like what you were saying about your technology customers. okay, they're being nimble. Hey, let's try this. You know, I think that Dr. Jeff DeGraff at Competing Values always talks about when you're innovating, it's really all about shots on goal. So I think a lot of times for customers, it's let's take and run some, I call them off-Broadway plays. You know, let's run an activity where we're going to try this in a small way and see if it works. And if it doesn't, we'll change. But we didn't have to, as Blaze was saying, these large organizations, they can't shift their whole real estate portfolio, right? You got to be wise, but I think there's a great time for experimentation and fail small, but fail forward.
I love that. I love that. So last question, Blaze, to you. Are there any thriving markets right now, whether in St. Louis or nationally?
Do you mean as far as cities go, or
Yeah,
locations?
More industries. Like, are there any industries that are thriving? You have not specific clients that are growing, but people that are actively thriving during this time.
I think, interestingly enough, we had a Midwest call, and right now, and I'm going to use real estate as the example here. The appetite for biotechnology buildings is growing pretty quickly right now from an investor perspective. So if you want to follow the money on that one, I just think with what's going on, you see, buildings have nanomaterials on their door handles now. That's something that I would not have thought to see, a year ago at this point, but those are becoming more common. Solutions for sterilizing things that I can't even foresee right now, but I think biotech is probably going to do really well during all this. From an office industry perspective, business hasn't changed a whole lot. Now, I think travel, tourism have been hit very hard. Hospitality hit very hard just because people aren't going anywhere. But on the flip side of that, I think the demand for that going forward in the next couple of years is going to be astronomical. People that like to go to concerts, haven't been to a concert in a while. You're not going to be able to buy tickets to anything. I feel like there's just going to be this pent up demand for that stuff that I think will help us on the other side. And to Rob's point, post 1918 pandemic, you end up with one of the greatest economic booms in this country's history. So usually what happens. I mean, it's just kind of one of those things. But I think right now here today, biotech is probably something that's at the forefront. But there will be other pockets that that come up going forward. Anything with virtual technology is probably going to be going well. I just talked about Zoom and Exxon. That's a prime example right there.
Right. Well, the clock actually just struck on the hour, so we just finished up our time here. I want to thank each of the panelists today. I think there was a lot of good insight shared. I love to hear some of the commonality between each of what you had to say today, and then I think there is some exciting shifting happening in 2021. So I'm excited to see how that's going to impact basically all of our lives in 2021. For all of our attendees, we've got our panelists' contact information up on the screen. If you have anything specific that you'd like to reach out to each of our panelists for, their contact information is right there. But thank you again to everyone, those both panelists and attendees. Hopefully everyone walked away with a nugget and action steps that they can apply in their own organization. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks, Blaze. Great job.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.